I am not being funny, but can anyone please tell me what the hell that is supposed to be? Hey guys, how is it all going? Thank you so much for joining me for what is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge movie review. And to get into the quick plot of Part 2 is, I think the movie is set something like 5 years after the events of what took place in the original, and a new family have moved into the house that Nancy lived in. And there's a young lad called Jesse who was basically being haunted and stalked by Freddy Krueger in his dreams. And in part two, Freddy Krueger wants to possess Jesse and use his body for him to be able to kill in the real world instead of just the dream world. So, part two, for many years, and for me as well, fans didn't really take to it. And I was one of them. When I first watched the Elm Street movies, like a long time ago when I first watched them, I must have been like maybe 12, 13, going on to 14 when I started watching ones after the original. And I really did not like part two at all. And I continued to not like part two for a long time, to be honest with you. And I got surprised when, like a few years back, when I revisited the Elm Street series, and I hadn't watched part two for many years. And I stuck in part two to watch it again. And I was surprised by how much I actually really enjoyed it, like many years after. And there's so much in part two, especially rewatching it now to do this review for you guys. I think there's some fantastic moments in the series and stands out that I think this movie does better than other Elm Street movies that are going to come after it. And I will get to that in a second, but I like the fact that recently, and I would say up until, I don't know, maybe the last 5 years or whatever, that Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 has gained a lot more love and recognition from Elm Street fans and probably horror fans that have just started coming to the Elm Street series now to watch them. And I've actually started realising just how much of a decent Elm Street movie Part 2 is. Now, I never used to like the route they took when I first watched it back in the day of like Freddy trying to possess Jesse to use him to kill in the real world. And you'd never really seen that plot happen before in the original, and you don't see it happen after. I don't think off the top of my head. But what I like about part two now is the fact that they tried something different with the plot. They very easily could have just rehashed the plot of the original and done it again, but they didn't. They tried something new and something fresh to it, and I appreciate that with part two. And it probably also helps that Wes Craven never came back for part two. He ends up coming back for part three, Dream Warriors, which feels obviously more of a sequel to the original than what part two does, because after part two was pretty much kind of forgotten about. Like, it didn't happen. Because obviously part two has a whole new bunch of characters. No one is back for the original apart from Robert Englund, which nearly never happened anyway. They had someone else playing Freddy to start with, and then realised very quickly, we need Robert Englund back. And it's like, yeah, of all the things you've got to keep on in this Elm Street series, it's Robert Englund as Freddy. So I'm glad that they realised that, and I'm glad that that happened, because I don't think I would have liked part two as much if it wasn't Robert Englund playing Freddy Krueger. So, to dive into my positives of part two, like I said before, there's many moments in part two that are standouts in the series for me. And one of them is the opening of this movie. I love the opening of this film. It is creepy as fuck and really sets the tone for this movie. And I would argue that part two, it has got to be, or it is close, as being the darkest Elm Street movie in the series. I would say darker than the original. And what helps make that happen is a couple of things. I think the tone of Dark 2 is just bleak, especially when it comes to Jesse and Freddy just toying with him basically and just wanting to possess his body so he can kill in the real world. And there's just this really uneasy feeling. It's quite similar to the original, but I think more here. And you really feel for Jesse as a character. And I think that that's due in part of Mark Patterson that plays Jesse in this movie. I think does an absolutely fantastic job in this film. He acts his ass off. I think he's absolutely brilliant in this movie, and you really do feel for his character going through this. He is going through some real shit, and your heart goes out to him. And I would say this part two is very much a psychological horror as well. Like, because I mean, Jesse is pretty much losing his mind in this movie, you know. And also, I mean, one of the stands out in this movie as well, apart from Mark Patterson, is Robert Englund as Freddy. This is, hands down, the scariest, darkest Freddy in any Elm Street movie going forward now. You think he's dark in the original. My God, he's terrifying in part two. Absolutely terrifying. And I will also say this is the best looking Freddy that we've got in the series. Not in the sense that I think he's gorgeous, right? Not like that. But I mean, he just looks horrific. Like, you would not want to bump into this guy in your dreams whatsoever. You know, I just think he looks terrifying. And like I said, he's just dark and mean. There's no jokes with him in this. I mean, there's dark humour in part two, but Freddy's not like the cheesy comedian that he's going to kind of turn into in these later sequels, which I don't mind. But I prefer my Freddy Krueger just dark and nasty and mean. And I think in part two, he is all of that and more. And it's one of the things that I've really grown to like part two for, is because of Freddy Krueger in this movie. Also, I think some of the effects in this movie, some of the practical effects in this movie are seriously impressive. Like the part where he does possess Jesse, and then you kind of see the transformation happening. It's when he's in his mate's bedroom, and then you see like Freddy just literally come out of Jesse. I think is fantastic, and like I said, with rewatching this movie just recently to do this review for you guys, I was still impressed by just how much that effect looks. It's sometimes, you know, you just can't beat practical effects, and I really wish nowadays there was more of that instead of CGI. I don't mind CGI, but just, I don't know, I just get a buzz off practical effects, and I love going back to these older horror movies and seeing them done really well, and that effect is fantastic, to be honest with you. It's also a great scene. It really is. To get into my negatives of part two, I weirdly enough, for someone that didn't like it originally, I don't have any, really. I think this film is solid. I would say probably the only real thing I wished we got more of, I do wish we got more of Freddy Krueger in this movie. He's not in it a lot. When he is in it, it elevates the movie massively. Particularly, I forgot to say for me positives, after he's, you know, possessed Jesse, there's this pool party, and the whole scene with Freddy Krueger at this pool party in the garden is one of my favourite scenes in all the Elm Street movies. It's the part where like the flame is coming up behind him, and he's just stood there like that, and he's just looking at them all, and he's like, "You are all my children now." I think is a great scene, and it's probably one of my favourite scenes in the entire series. I loved it. But anyway, what was I saying? I got sidetracked. Yes, I wish Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger was in it a little bit more in part two. I think we needed a little bit more of him. Not too much more, because, like I said, in the later sequels, I think you get too much of Freddy. Basically, Freddy Krueger becomes the star of the series, really. And I don't know, some people will say rightly so to that, and other ones will be a little bit like me, where yes, I would love to see more of him, but still keep him like a mystery, creepy, still kind of, you know, because in the first couple of sequels, he's still scary, and then he doesn't become scary anymore. But like I say, I will get to that when we get further down into the series. I don't want to get ahead of myself. But yeah, this is a similar situation with me with Friday the 13th Part 5. I never used to like Part 5 at all. And then I reviewed the series again for you guys, and I was surprised by how much I actually enjoyed 5. This is a little bit different. I rewatched Part 2 a few years back and found myself really enjoying it and being surprised by that because of how much I disliked it when I first watched it the first time around. But I think part two is a solid sequel in this series, and it is a shame that they don't touch on it in the later sequels. But part two has a fond place in my heart. I really enjoy it, and I would give it a solid 4.5 out of 5. I think this is highly worth your time, and I like that it is gaining the respect and love nowadays that I feel it should have got back when it was first released. So, guys, do you feel the same as part two as what I do, or do you still not like it, or do you prefer part three being more of a sequel to the original Elm Street? Whatever it is, guys, please leave a comment below. It is absolutely always a pleasure hearing from us. And as always, please take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you again real soon. Take care, guys. Goodbye now.